Hello, and welcome to today's edition of Love Thy Body. I'm your host with the most, Skyler, and we're here to discuss a few things that I feel like are very important. The purpose of this podcast is to talk to different professionals that work in images that deal with body, beauty, sex, and highlight what they do, how they found their way on that journey to be on that type of profession and get a little bit of what their story is. So, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce my first guest. My guest is a sexual wellness coach. She's an author. She is a content creator and a podcaster. And some great advice, information, some beautiful story about being queer and part of the queer community and being a Latina and what health and wellness looks like. Please join me in welcoming Dieniz Costa. First off, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me a little bit about how you got interested in doing work with the body.
Yeah. For me personally, I think when I first started exploring my own body was very early on. Um, and there was a lot of shaming that came with that from my family for various reasons, from cultural to religious. Um, and in middle school, high school, your body starts changing for most people. My body started changing when I was like 7, 8. My boobs started coming in. Like I was 8 with like double A's or whatever. By the time I was like 12, I had full blown size D cups. So that really kind of brought a lot more awareness to my body. Um, and yeah, like I just kept exploring it because I was trying to understand like why were old men hollering at me in the street when I was like so young, right? It's like I'm a child, like that seems wrong to me. And like
Yeah.
um you know my queerness and exploring my sexuality and my body through that. So it wasn't until I would say probably my freshman year in college that I was like, yeah, this thing called sexuality, this thing called the body, the field of studying this, because I didn't even know that that was a thing that you could like make a career out of studying the body and studying sexuality beyond like the medical fields, because I was pre-med going in. Um, that was when I was like, yeah, let's do this. Let's play here, because this is an area I've always found interesting. And I took as much uh, curriculum and classes and seminars and webinars and retreats and conferences around sexuality and opening up how we connect to the body, how we see the body, um, and that really has brought me to where I am today.
It's a great overview. Let's start from the beginning. Tell me
Yeah.
a little bit about like where you're from and what your upbringing was like.
Yeah. So I identify as Afro Latinx, and the way that that kind of breaks down is I have heritage from Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Spain, Venezuela, and Taino traditions, the indigenous tribe. And, you know, I was born in New York City and raised in the island. So it's very two different worlds. And the way that uh, we relate to the body kind of in like a New York City environment is very different from how you relate to the body in Puerto Rico.
Right.
Right. So, like, one, culturally, and two, like the spaces that I was residing in both. Right. Because when I was here, I was in a more liberal space.
Here being Puerto Rico,
No, here in the States.
in the States.
When I was in the States, I was in a more liberal setting, like in terms of my mom and in some ways the culture.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but liberal in not in like, oh, let your body be seen. In Puerto Rico, it's more like liberal, like your body is just part of who you are. Just let it be seen. But I was living with my grandparents, which meant I was going to church, 5-6 days a week.
Right.
um, very different like environments. So it's been a lot of contradictions, and I think that part of my experience is like this emigrant, right? Emigrating from like Puerto Rico to the States back and forth several times throughout my life. And that's also impacted how I relate to my body.
Mm.
Yeah, so I grew up on the island. I came and I did high school out here in the Bronx. That was shell shock. I went to a pretty tough school, managed to do pretty well despite that. And yeah,
Mm.
off to college I went.
So, what are some of the maybe hidden stigmas or cultural habits that you see in the Latinx community when it comes to the body or to sexuality?
Um, well, I think our bodies have been uh, used, right?
Mm.
And manipulated in a way that how Latinx people are perceived is very um, one-sided. In that, for example, the the beer girls, right? Like Budweiser, Corona, like they were all Latinx bombshells, right?
Right. Okay.
And you're given this like image even through like media of like, think of actresses, really famous actresses that are Latinx. Salma Hayek, that's a very specific look that
Mm.
is being sold as Latinx. It is not a look that um, shows different body sizes. It's not a look that shows different shades of brown, and definitely not blackness.
Mm.
So, as someone who's Afro Latinx, I think within the Latino culture, there's a lot of anti Blackness and internalized oppression that shows up through the body, right? In the ways that we hide certain bodies from the media or like portray certain bodies to be one thing that they're not always. Like, not every curvaceous Latina is gonna be a Budweiser girl, and just because she's a Budweiser girl doesn't mean she's a slut. But that's the linking kind of just keeps going, right? Like, there's all these like, the loose Latina, um, loose woman.
Oh,
I mean, I would say it's beyond
the
just Latinas.
archetypes. Mhm.
All these archetypes. One specific thing I think is like we have a lot more gender norms and gendered language that is hard, especially in 2020 when so many people are trying to redefine who they are and really come fully into their beingness. We don't have gender neutral language. We don't have like an acceptance of more gender neutral ways of being, right? Like women there's a lot of expectations on women and a lot of expectations on men, and there's not um, so much space in between, and
What
that's
do you feel like
cultural.
those expectations are, like the number, I guess, top two, top three expectations for men and women?
um, Men are aggressive, women are docile. um, you know, outspoken versus quiet. Even here where I'm currently at in Mexico, I see it. Like, a lot of women don't talk to other women or anyone. It's like the husband's the one to talk at the bank. She just stands there.
Hmm.
It's her account. I'm like, I listen into these like, I like observing people. So
Right.
I listen into conversations and I see how social dynamics happen here. And it's like, it's your bank account, it's your money, but your husband's the one like managing it.
Hmm.
um
So you still,
Roles like household things that are less physically strenuous are more for women, right? It's like women here must cook. It's like, you don't cook, you're not a woman, right? And it's like, no, I most chefs in the world are men. I just proved you wrong. Right? Like, but there's still that perception that, like, in the family home, the gender norms will be,
still very misogynistic.
yeah, will still be respected and honored. And like, that's just part of our culture.
First.
Right. So there's almost like that excusing of patriarchy and misogyny of like, oh, well, that's just our culture.
Hmm.
And I'm like, no, that's not just our culture. That's somebody else's culture that got put on ours.
It's interesting that you say that, because I mean, there are so many layers to what Latin culture is now. It's almost where do you start with some things?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with colorism, sure, uh, it's very easy to understand how that facilitated throughout time and throughout history, um, but maybe not as much with uh, the way we view our bodies otherwise. Maybe with size, maybe with other aspects of what we deem attractive or what we deem as acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I think I've been exposed to a lot of beautiful, like, art and um culture that is kind of like against the grain.
Mm-hmm.
And in seeing that, I think, there's a lot of, even back in the day when it was a lot more like hunting and gathering, right, out in the fields, and that was kind of like everybody's
Right,
life, not just like a class thing.
right.
um in places like the Caribbean, you wanted a big bone thick woman,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, even in certain Asian countries, being very thick was desirous because it showed in some ways status
Yeah,
and health, right? So
luxury. It's luxury to be.
yeah, like, oh, you thick, you could eat, you got food. Right? That's kind of what that meant, is like, oh, you got food.
Yeah.
So there's value to you because you have resource. And I think we've moved away from that. We've moved away from accepting all shapes and sizes, and kind of prescribe to some bullshit. I
Yeah.
can't even go into what the bullshit is because we all know it.
So with all that, we agree we do all of it. But with with that, how did you, I guess, navigate, I guess, falling in love with the body
Yeah.
of wanting to pursue it as a profession? Because you said earlier you were already going to med school.
I was pre-med. So
Med.
I was pre-med.
There was still a fascination of love there. Where did that really come from?
Um honest honestly, the most honest answer here is orgasm.
Hmm.
Um because I found it fascinating that the body could have such an experience. Like this electric energy just builds, and then it like blows and you're fine. Right? Um and like I said early on, I was exploring my body, and that is probably because I had been sexually abused, as a child, and did not know at the time, but now I know. So it all kind of makes sense, in hindsight. But for me, I think that was one of the main things that I was like, this is interesting. This reaction is interesting. Um, then I had a lot of like just connection to the earth in Puerto Rico, and like home remedies, and my grandmother and I would make remedies using herbs and natural plants. Um, and then I started learning like, oh, if you mix these things, you can get the body to react a certain way, right? And look a certain way, right? And like with aging and with growth, you kind of get the criticisms that come with family, right? Is like, oh, like you're a little pudgy,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Or like, oh, this one's growing like super fast, and oh, that one's a little delayed, right? And like the family will talk about this at like
Out loud.
gatherings
Yeah.
out loud,
In
and
front of you. Yeah.
regardless of them saying it to you or not, you're fucking listening.
Right. Yeah.
So I started to, yeah, feel some insecurities around my body. I was a 12-year-old with fucking size D tits. So, um, and there was envy from like my sister who didn't have boobs at the time. And, you know, it was like, what's happening with my body? What is this thing? Why are all these reactions happening? How can we manipulate it for our better good? And that's really where it started.
Mm.
And I just kept going, and then it's like you learn about the orgasm cycle, and then you learn about the sleep cycle, and like anything that I can get my hands on that has to do with wellness, or how the body reacts to food, or essential oils. Like, I just find it fascinating. Anything, even this whole pandemic that's happening right now with the coronavirus, and how people are relating to their bodies through it all, is fascinating to me,
Mm.
right? Because it's like, isolate yourself, but isolation has a physical repercussion,
Right.
right? When you isolate yourself physically, there is skin hunger, there is um, lower levels of oxytocin and norepinephrine, and like happy hormones that are happening. So, and also the fear, right? The fear that kicks in, and it's like, oh, my body might work against me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of the mentality in our society is like our bodies working against us. So we have to hack it, right? And if you think about people who are trying to manipulate their bodies in a specific way at the gym to like lose weight or gain muscle or like whatever, um on some level, right? There's something that you don't like,
Okay, I get you.
right?
Yeah.
How you relate to not liking that, I think, is the more important piece to it, right? That like the psychological dimension to that. And not a lot of people look at that.
Mm.
That I'm making this a decision from a place of power versus um, scarcity or limitation or comparison.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's you said so much there. It's like it's almost where to start in the response. Um, I guess I want to start from the beginning and I'll come sprinkle my way back through some of those other things. So, starting with the orgasm, what
Mm-hmm.
was that first orgasm experience like? And what were your feelings or thoughts about it pre versus post? Because I'm sure there was conservative messaging around sexuality. So how did you feel about it before you found that space, and what was
Mm-hmm.
the process after?
I think I was so young when I started to explore that I wasn't aware then that what I was even exploring was sexual, right? It's just like you look in a mirror, you're like, oh, there's these two darker spots on my chest. I wonder what they do,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, because we're all flat chested when we're little, right? And you know, you wipe in the bathroom and it doesn't feel good, or it does feel good, or you hold your pee too long and it feels good, and you're like, oh, what's that?
Mm-hmm.
And you just start exploring, right? And it literally happens from infants, like babies are doing this, right? And like we socially like curb that behavior,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like only do that in private, only don't do that, right? Like most people here don't do that,
Right.
right? It's like the more forward thinking parents who are like, oh, just do that in private. But we're social beings. So most of my moments of curiosity came from like, oh, that looks different on you than it does on me,
Mm-hmm.
with cousins or, my sister or like the neighbor's kid.
So how do you think that should be more socialized in our current society, especially now with think about the virus, the coronavirus, and
Yeah.
how do we make that more normal?
I think one of the biggest opportunities we have with this corona situation is that we have time. And time is the one resource we don't get more of ever. Like it happened to happen. Yesterday was yesterday. There won't be a yesterday tomorrow. You know?
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I think so many of us in this day and age are like just running and not processing and not going inward and really looking at ourselves. And I think that that's what the beauty of this opportunity is that we get time to just like go in on ourselves, like get to know you, get to know your body, get to experience like another type of orgasm. There are many types of orgasm. There are many ways you can make you or someone else come, and I think that um, that's just part of it, right? The pleasure part. But I think the honoring of our temple at that level where we really get to know it, where we really listen to it,
Mm-hmm.
is essential. I think so many of us keep going beyond our body's limits, and the mind and the body don't always communicate well. That's my 2 cents for now.
Right. So where does the difference between like sexual wellness, like where's the difference between sexual wellness and different ethnic or sexual oriented communities? How does it differ for someone who's Latinx versus someone who's Black versus someone who's bi or transitioning? How does that differ?
I think intersectionality is real. And we each have a set of intersections that happen in our identity, right? I'm queer and I'm Latinx and I'm, for the most part identifying as a hippie. Right? Like, and you have all of these identities, pansexual, poly, that overlap and intersect. And some bring you some privilege and others oppress you further, right? In terms of like societal perception. Um, so I think culturally that's really real, right? Just to name something, not even sexual, like a dude pissing on the street. If the dude is white, he's likely to receive less shit from a cop than if he was Black. A Black dude doing that, you going to jail.
Mm.
You know, white dude, he might get a citation, might not even get that. Right. And that's just the realities of living in America in these days. But our bodies are being policed differently too. Right. Like, even worrying about the color of our skin, that internalized cultural fear in some ways, right? Like there's a fear around like Blackness, right? Whether it's like people of another culture perceiving Blackness as a threat, or us of color being like, oh shit, I gotta protect myself because I'm too Black, right? That like my Blackness is being used against me on a daily,
Mm.
you know? And I don't know that. I have never lived that personally, but I've witnessed it daily with family members, with friends, with partners. And I think that whether we see it, want to acknowledge it or not, all of these social structures have a psychological impact on us.
Mm.
And there's internalized racism that we feel towards ourselves at times. There's internalized colorism that we feel at times. There's internalized body shaming and hatred that we feel at times. And I think we really just got to get real about it and say it happens, right? It's almost like part of the process of figuring out this vessel called your body. Um, but if we don't talk about it, if we don't have conversations like this one where we actually shine light on these issues, I don't know how we can move forward
Right.
in a way that's body positive and affirming and celebrating and loving.
So I agree with him. But as a community, as a world community, this spans a little further than just American society.
Mhm.
As a world community, how do we uh, have this conversation so that we can affect uh, more of a lasting change? Like, sure, the first step is being able to talk, but what do we want to do through talking? Like, what's our next step?
Heal. Healing. You know, it's as much as this pandemic is impacting us, it's also like giving Earth a chance to breathe without us like choking it a bit, you know? And I think similarly, like we have an opportunity to allow the human collective to breathe around this issue of the body, right? Like there's been so much binding of it. Um, so I think it's gonna look different everywhere. And I think that that's like the most non American thing I can say, right? It's like we actually have to slow down enough to like meet people where they're at
Mm-hmm.
and start the conversation where they're at, not where we Americans, Dieniz sees it necessary to be started.
Right. So, what are some things you do for your own personal wellness?
Oh, my own personal wellness. This is a journey and I am glad to be having it with myself. And I think, especially right now, movement is really important. I know that people are chilling and Netflixing, and don't get me wrong, after dinner, I Netflix too. But connecting to our bodies through movement, really getting physical with yourself, right? Whether that's going for a walk or, you know, doing some jumping jacks or just doing some like dancing, like just like this. Look right here, like mm, mm, shake the just a little shimmy, just a little shimmy, just a little shimmy, right? But I think that remember your body is not working against you. Like your body is so brilliant. Like it does so much for us without asking for shit from us. Right? Like half of the functions in our body just take air. Not even food. You know what I mean? Like it's literally not asking us for anything. Um and it's so efficient and self-sufficient. Um and I think celebrating that is something I do daily, right? Daily gratitudes. I have daily times when I do stretching, meditating. I do sunbathing 20 minutes a day, y'all.
Hey.
Depression is real. And I sunbathe because, you know, I'm vegan. I take my B12, my D once a week because I'm on that high dose. And yeah, but I still make sure to get sunshine because like ain't nothing but sunshine gonna make me radiate more bright. Right, in my world that works for me, but find the things that make you radiate, right, that make your body feel alive, that make you feel invigorated and energized. um, Meditation, I meditate, and that's a way that I definitely connect with my body. I visualize every chakra and go down and then come back up and then go back down and come back up how many ever times I need to until my body feels zen.
Mm.
Um, Self pleasure, right? Like there ain't nothing gonna give you a little oxytocin boost, better than an orgasm
Right.
or
Oh,
a hug. But right now we're in social distancing, so the orgasm from
it's
self
like,
play is safer. Um, so I think those are major. I do keep a schedule.
mm,
I do go to bed at a certain time. I do wake up at a certain time, and I think that's what works for me, right? I have limited number of spoons every day, and when my spoons are done, they're done.
your spoons.
My spoons, yes. It's a theory. The spoon theory is about energy, and it is a theory that says we only have but so many spoons in a day
Okay.
of energy. So if you spend your spoons, what are you going to do? That's when we go into like fatigue.
Got you. Okay.
Um and especially for people who deal with chronic pain, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, anything like this, as I do, you want to be mindful of your spoons, right? And I think that that's actually something we should all be mindful for. Like, none of us should be pushing our bodies beyond its limit, because our body does create resentment,
Mm,
right? And you might not see it or feel it, but you will, right? And like, you might not connect it to your body having resentment, how you're, that cough or like that indigestion or whatever you're experiencing. But there's definitely physical imprinting to our lived experiences. And when you know that, and when you know that you only have but so many spoons, it's like, there is nothing in this world worth me sacrificing this vessel, this temple that I have.
mm.
Not a job.
'Cause you only get one. And you have
You only get one. And then you really start thinking, if it's not helping my body, then what is it doing?
self-destruction. You're headed for self-destruction.
Self harm. And that's one of the words that people just don't want to talk about, when it comes to the body, is, self harm and all the ways in which we do
So,
socially, even self harm. It's become socially acceptable to physically self harm. Like, maybe not mutilating, like cutting yourself, that's still socially unacceptable. But how is that different from eating something that you know is going to cut you from the inside out?
because it's so good. That's what they'll say.
I
But
know.
so typically, like, on that note, what would your clients most commonly come see you for?
Um, well, I specify and specialize my practice in serving people of color, uh, queer, LGBTQIA, mostly gender nonconforming, trans identified folks. And there is a slew of issues, right, that community specifically faces
Mm-hmm.
around the body. And it's one of the reasons why I love working with them, right? It's because how much more powerful does a journey get than to have your vessel, that you came in to this planet with, be one way when you're born, and you choose, right? Like, because of who you are innately, right? To 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 manipulate and morph it into something completely new
Right.
that you envision for yourself, the you that you see, and witnessing that and holding people through their emotions through that, through the meanness of society through that, um, reminding them of their brilliance through that, that is pure fulfillment for me. Because you can't get braver than that.
And what's one of the, I guess, hardest hurdles for those clients to get over when you're working with them?
Um, you know, right now in our world, I think there's more people who are identifying as gender nonconforming and choosing very deliberately how they want to be addressed in terms of like their gender pronouns and their names. And I think having that external recognition of someone using the right pronoun, of someone using the right name is so profound. And especially when it comes from your family. And I think that that's one of the issues that a lot of clients that I've had and currently have are struggling with is like, I know who I am. Why the fuck can't they see it? Why the fuck can't they accept it? Like, why won't they use the right pronoun or call me by my name?
Mm.
Right? And it's this like erasing that happens constantly, right? That is, I think, one of the biggest issues. The second I would say is like feeling safe in this world. And I think that that's one that, regardless of who's listening right now, we can all relate to that, right? And especially right now, given COVID-19, yeah, we can all really relate to that. And that's kind of the bigger call here is this is a time for us to really ground ourselves in that we are safe in our bodies, right? And like ground ourselves in like the magic that is our bodies.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when you said erasure a moment ago, the image that came up was Muhammad Ali when he first transitioned his name, and how people refused to call him by his moniker.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this resilience, this disrespect, this people sort of feel is what you once were is not. Um, you can't be anything other than what I knew you
Yeah.
at. Why do you think that persists through our culture, even though one of the most fabled and famous type of stories you see is the transformation story?
Yeah. I think part of it, and these words are resonating so loud for me, and I just have to say it because it's for someone listening. And I was this week talking with a client, and in their session, they said that their mother used the following expression, um, like, I brought you into this world, and as quickly as I brought you in, I'll take you out.
Mm-hmm. So, old mama saying,
right? That's what old mama's saying. And that old mama saying has caused so much harm in this world,
Mhm.
right? Because there is almost like this imposition of, I created you, and therefore you have to perform and look and be what I imagined you to be, versus allowing something to bloom and blossom and reveal what it is to you, right? It's that instant gratification that we are constantly seeking of, give me what I want now,
Right.
be what I want now. Um, and there's no room within that for you to have your own voice,
Well, I mean, I
right?
think
It's very,
that's just a part of the what is it called when you're self-absorbed?
narcissism.
Narcissism of having children. It's wanting to see yourself replicated, not necessarily you wanting to allow this person to be a person. You want to literally,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And that's a huge thing. Like, I write about this in my book. I'm like, there's a whole chapter, fuck motherhood. And the reason why I have a chapter called fuck motherhood is because the reasons why we have children and how we relate to motherhood are so skewed in a fucked up way that is harmful to both you and the children. Like, neither one of us is benefiting from these archaic imprintings of what motherhood and having a child is about.
right. Well, I was gonna wait to get into the book, but since you brought it up, let's get into it. Like,
Sorry.
no, I mean, it was a perfect drop. So,
Yeah.
what are some of those things that are archaic or outplayed or cliches in our society? What do you go into in the book in that regard?
I mean, I think archaic things are, the way we're marketed bodies, right? Like, that's very archaic at this point. Like, I'm sorry, I do not find tall, blonde, thin women remotely attractive. I don't care if all the supermodels, that's their look. Good luck in life. May God be with you. If you love your body, great. I want you to love your body, but I am tired of being told that I have to love your body and want my body to look like yours, right? Um, so I think that is like the most archaic. um, and there's been renditions, right? Like, it hasn't always been like this tall, blonde, thin woman, but it has been like, this is the look, right? Back in the 70s, Betty Page or Marilyn Monroe. There's always been a look to aspire to. And I
I
think,
of sorts to follow as the status quo or the
mm-hmm,
standard of beauty.
yeah, yes, exactly. And I'm here to say, fuck the standard of beauty, create your own standard, meet your own guidelines. And that is actually what's going to make you the happiest.
Yeah, and that's
Right. And
why I had you on. That I named this podcast after my book, Love Thy Body, which is entirely fine art nude collection, and social commentary, sort of on the same subject.
mm-hmm,
You know, I initially didn't even intend to make a book about that. I just wanted to show my perspective as an artist.
yeah.
It really came more apparent to me as I reflected on the conversations and lessons I learned working with all these different models about how they saw themselves versus how the world saw them. Typically, anyone who saw the photos that I did with them, they were enamored with the model or the person in the photo. Um, but typically, the story behind me getting the photo was tumultuous, be it a cancellation, be it they didn't feel comfortable with themselves or needed a pep talk, or I had to psychologically make them forget about everything that they were doing to make this shot that they eventually loved. So
Yeah.
so insecure
Mm-hmm.
to some degree about the way that they looked or the way that people would perceive them, um, be it professionally or through their other relationships, or just not looking and living up to the standard of what we consider to be the beautiful people in our society.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally am curious also, like, how was it? Because I've seen this, like, when a client finally like realizes their brilliance or like their beauty, like, how was it for you as an artist once they saw that final product and they were like in love with it and they're like, is this really me?
Oh, it's interesting
To
because
witness that.
I have to do that while I'm shooting often. So for me, there's this point in the beginning of my shoot, I don't really typically show much to the client or to the talent, and I don't really ask much of them initially. I try to figure out really who they are and what it is about their character that I want out of them, or what's resonating with me to them in that situation. And then once I know I'm starting to find them and I've got all my technical stuff right, I know it only takes a little bit of a pep talk and a little psychological play to get them in the space that I want them to be in. Like,
Mm.
oh, if I know I got the shot 10 minutes ago, that was a nice shot. I maybe won't show them initially, but I can't show you that yet. You're not ready for that. You're not gonna know how to act. I gotta shoot tomorrow. So, as I'm going and I'm shooting, and then I finally, let that anticipation build, and I show them something that looks nice, that represents them in a way that they didn't feel like they could look. It really almost immediately boosts their confidence. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's like an orgasm, or it's like getting high or something. It's like that endorphin boost hits, and then
Yeah.
they're more willing and more eager to push further and to be more adventurous with giving their best to the shoot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I think that's actually how we met. I was um, guest speaking on a panel
Yes.
at a conference, and
Mm-hmm.
you were one of the participants of that.
I was mapping your desire. Mm.
And it was interesting because I felt totally out of place um, at the time. I had my book. Um, I hadn't published it. I hadn't really shown it to a lot of people. Um, and I was asked to do the sex conference as a guest speaker panelist. Um, Again, at the time, I wasn't doing anything sex related. I didn't have any content or any post that was related to that.
Mm-hmm.
So uh, I was asked to be the representative for the cis straight male part of the population or part of the conversation as,
Mm-hmm.
for my work as a new photographer. And, sitting on there with Marla and Terry Grant,
uh, two other sex experts, and they're like, one deals with trauma victims, and one is a LBGT, ABCXYZ activist, and then this person does psychology, and this person is the conference owner. And I'm like, oh, I shoot nudes. I shoot naked people sometimes as an artist. It's great. I didn't really appreciate that people really struggle with their image and with feeling confident, with feeling good about themselves,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's on photo or just in everyday life. And
Yeah.
sort of almost immediately after that class, just the response I got from everyone in there, because I was frankly surprised anyone cared that I was in the room. They were so receptive and so moved, it sort of pivoted me into doing this body of content, one towards
Yeah.
sexual wellness, one towards body positive, really expanding that conversation.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember that conference so well. And I remember like really enjoying your perspective on things, and like I even think about how much conversation about body positivity happens around the female body
Mm-hmm.
versus like the male body.
Yeah.
And for me, one of the things throughout the years helping so many people, a lot of men come, like cis hetero men come to me for um you know problems with functional arousal issues. I wouldn't say erectile dysfunction because they're a little on the younger side, but definitely some form of having a hard time having an erection or keeping an erection. And then just a lot of questions about penis size.
Yeah.
And penis shape and penis like look, just like the look of it. And it's like one of the things I've said this in podcasts and other things that I've done is like for anyone having sex with someone with a penis, regardless of genders and orientations and whatnot, they cannot change that thing. Right? It's like you are born or it's created for you, and it's like one shot deal.
Right.
Right? Like there is no like tip, just cut a couple inches off the tip, or like put a couple inches on it, or like make it a little thicker. Like this isn't like a customize a penis.
Right.
Like
it doesn't
humanity, work. Right? It doesn't work like that. So I think also there's just been so much damage done to like the male psyche that then perpetuates the patriarchy and the misogyny and like.
Well, I think it's interesting because it's the female body has been explored, venerated, and exploited.
Yes.
Right. So we're very, very comfortable in whatever form seeing and dealing with and judging the female body. And the male body, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. So like with men, you don't have really any of the conversations that are normalized with women. You don't have really any of the actions that are normalized with women. And then the way our society looks at men is typically like, put your clothes on and step up there. You know what I'm saying? So the daily affirmations I think that women get about what beauty is in whatever genre or subgenre they are, because we know that mainstream America says one thing, and then Black America says something else, and then Dominican Latina America says something else, and then there are all these subgroups that say what they think is attractive, archetypal for their groups.